name is Pat Kane, Public Programs Visitor Services Coordinator at the Museum of the Grand Prairie, part of the Champaign County Forest Preserve District. And we're all here tonight for an excellent program titled 19 Suffragists, 19 Historic Homes that we're going to get to in just a few moments. I also want to thank our guest tonight, our Museum and Education Department Director, Barb Garvey, joining us to present tonight's program. Again, I want to thank all of you for tuning in, and I want to thank those of you who have already chimed in the comment section, letting us know where you're watching from tonight. If you haven't done so already, let us know by writing down below, typing in the comments box where you're watching from tonight. We got quite a few people tuning in, so I want to thank you all again. Lee from Monticello, thank you. Cindy from Barry, Illinois, welcome. Edna watching from Lombard, Illinois. Carol, one of our big fans. I see you quite often attending our virtual programs, Carol. Thanks for coming back, watching from Bloomington. Jermaine, also another one of our big fans from Vermilion County. Thank you for tuning in again. Julie, all the way from Havana, Florida. Thank you for tuning in. Mark Hansen, familiar face. Hey, Mark, watching in Rantoul. Jen watching from Wisco, which I assume means Wisconsin. Thank you. Susan tuning in from the Villages, Florida. Brenda tuning in from Naples, Florida. John, familiar face, tuning in from Champaign. So again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and let us know where you're watching from by writing it in that comments section. If you have any questions throughout the course of the program tonight, feel free to write them in the comment section. Let us know if you can hear us okay. Let us know if you can see everything okay. For those of you who would like to see closed captions, be sure to mess with that gear cog wheel. Should be in the bottom right-hand corner, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, and make sure you select to turn closed captioning on if you'd like to see closed captions tonight. Click that gear cog wheel and adjust your settings accordingly. Before we get into tonight's program, I want to go over a few housekeeping items, a few thank yous, a few things coming up with the Museum of the Grand Prairie and CCFPD. First, a little bit about us. If you're unfamiliar with the Museum of the Grand Prairie, we opened originally in 1968 as the Early American Museum, and our current mission is to collect, preserve, and interpret the cultural and natural history of Champaign County and East Central Illinois for everyone, all visitors, whether it's virtual or in person. Tonight's program also tied to our special exhibit titled How Long Must Women Wait? Women's Suffrage and Women's Rights in Champaign County. This exhibit we put out in March of last year, March of 2020, to help commemorate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment's ratification last year in the year 2020. The exhibit explores the women's suffrage movement locally and nationally as only one landmark in a long continuing struggle for women and other marginalized people to claim an equal role in society. Excuse me. If you haven't had the opportunity to check it out, please, we're hoping that if all goes well here in Central Illinois, here in Champaign County, that we will be able to reopen. And our first day for reopening, we're aiming for Tuesday, March 2nd. And we'll have a whole bunch of COVID safety protocols to keep everybody safe, staff members and visitors in place for everyone to come and visit us safely. And so you can also check out this wonderful special exhibit in person. So again, we're hoping to do that on Tuesday, March 2nd. Stay tuned to our Facebook page, social media pages, and website to learn more about that and for upcoming updates. Also, this event is part of a special exhibit speaker series made possible throughout the entire year from independent donors and women-owned or women-led businesses and organizations, those being Campfire Concepts, ChampaignMoms.com, 5 Foot Productions, Guth and Associates LLC, Jessie Marie Studio LLC, the McGuire Home Collection, Organizing CU, Page Roasting Company, Simply Anchored Boutique, and the Right Start Preschool. So be sure to visit these local businesses or their websites, patronize them any way you can, help support these great people who have helped support this speaker series. A few upcoming programs happening with the Museum of the Grand Prairie and Champaign County Forest Preserve District. We have, if you're local to the area, feel free to get out and explore Champaign County Forest Preserves and search for some snowflakes. We got the first ever CCFPD snowflake search. 30 snowflakes hidden at 6 preserves across the county. These beautiful snowflakes that district staff painted so colorfully and creatively, also with some cultural and environmental fun facts next to them. So we encourage you all to get out there. It may be a little colder, but you're still going to have a whole bunch of fun exploring the forests and CCFPD in the wintertime, searching for these snowflakes. And when you find one, post it on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. Use the hashtag CCFPD snowflake search. So go check out that CCFPD snowflake search. Find some snowflakes right here in Champaign County. Nice little excuse to get outside here in the wintertime here in Central Illinois. This coming, I'm sorry, next Tuesday, Tuesday, February 9th, we're going to have a couple bag giveaways, craft bag giveaways at the Museum of the Grand Prairie from 1 to 3 p.m. or while supplies last. What we'll have available are 2 different kinds of bags, one bag with a Valentine's Day theme, as well as one bag with an Abraham Lincoln theme, since Abraham Lincoln's birthday is also coming up here in the near future. So if you're interested in picking up a free craft bag with some awesome hands-on activities and crafts that will be within that bag, feel free to drop by the Museum of the Grand Prairie in Mahomet, Illinois on Tuesday, February 9th from 1 to 3 p.m. or again while supplies last. Those bags are free. We have our first ever virtual edition of Maple Sugar Days, a popular annual event that we normally do at Homer Lake Forest Preserve due to the historic maple sugar grove that is out there. But we're doing it virtually this year. It'll be broadcast on our Facebook and YouTube page, much like tonight's program. That program, Maple Sugar Days Virtual, is going to happen on Thursday, February 11th at 7 o'clock Central Standard Time, where we will talk about the history of making maple syrup, maple sugaring, talk about a little bit of the science behind it, what happens to those trees right around this time of the year that makes it so great for us to be able to tap these trees to make some maple syrup, and teach you how to make some maple syrup at home by tapping trees that you may have in your backyard if you got some sugar maples in your backyard. Again, that program's on Thursday, February 11th at 7 o'clock right here on our Facebook and YouTube pages again. Last program to promote on Lincoln's 212th birthday, which is going to be Friday, February 12th at 10 a.m. We're going to have a special program titled Stories with Mary. It's going to be a virtual visit with Mary Lincoln, first-person interpretation put on by Pam Brown of Springfield, Illinois, where she will take on the role of Mary Lincoln, and she does an excellent job. We had her at the museum last year. She's going to visit us virtually to talk about the Lincoln family in the White House. I'll talk about her time, Mary Lincoln's time in the White House, raising those children in the White House, and just enjoy Lincoln's 212th birthday together virtually. That's going to be at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time on Friday, February 12th. For more information about everything happening at the Museum of the Grand Prairie throughout CCFPD, feel free to follow us on our social media pages, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, or check out museumofthegrandprairie.org or ccfpd.org. Again, let us know where you're watching from by clicking that screen share button. Also, if you prefer closed captions, toggle that gear cog wheel in the bottom right-hand corner to pull up closed captioning. So we have some more folks tuning in. Laura tuning in from Champaign. Welcome back, Laura. We've got Sue tuning in from Rossville. Janet tuning in from Urbana. Perry, a familiar face, tuning in from Urbana as well. Good to see you, Perry. Thanks for tuning in tonight. Katie tuning in from Urbana, another familiar face. Hey, Katie, office mate. And Dale tuning in from Benton. So thanks everybody for tuning in tonight. And if you have any questions throughout the course of the program, write them in the comments section, and we'll address those towards the end of the program. Okay, so now I'm going to bring on Barb, and I'm going to introduce her, and we're going to turn it over to Barb for tonight's program. So hey, Barb.
Hey, Pat.
Hey. So Barb Garvey is going to be giving our presentation tonight, and I'm going to do a quick introduction of Barb. So if you don't know Barb, Barb Olschlager Garvey is the director of the Museum and Education Department at the Champaign County Forest Preserve District, which includes overseeing the operations at the Museum of the Grand Prairie, as well as our sister facility, the Homer Lake Interpretive Center at Homer Lake Forest Preserve. Um, uh, so um, so we focus, as I mentioned before, on local cultural and natural history, and the Homer Lake Interpretive Center focuses on natural and environmental education here in Champaign County. Prior to becoming director of the department, Barb served as curator at the museum for 12 years. She received her bachelor's in anthropology and art history from Indiana University in Bloomington and has a PhD in art history from the University of Illinois. Barb is originally from Cincinnati, Ohio, and is a big fan of baseball and the Cincinnati Reds. Her other passions include all things local Abe Lincoln history related, her family, her 3 daughters, and her 4 grandchildren. So, without further ado, let's give a warm virtual welcome to Barb Garvey. Yeah, Barb. Have a good program tonight. Yeah, I told Barb before this I was very much looking forward to this because I live right here in Champaign, and I'm interested to go scope some of these houses out that Barb is going to talk about
Great. Are we ready? Am I going now?
tonight. Go for it. Yeah.
Well, let me just say before I turn on my PowerPoint, thank you all for coming tonight. I know there are lots of people from places all over the Midwest at least, and I know there's one person who's living on the East Coast, and we had a couple of people in Florida. I think the important point about tonight's talk, because the historic homes that I'm going to talk about are in Champaign and Urbana for the most part. So many of you may not be able to visit them, but a thing to remember is that there was a grassroots movement for woman suffrage, and there are homes everywhere in every community you live in where someone was working to pass woman suffrage, and you need to just scratch the surface and you'll find them. So, uh, having said that, I'll start talking about the local homes. Okay. I'm gonna clear my screen. This will take a few minutes, a few seconds technically, guys, so hang on. Is it showing, Pat? Okay,
Looks good, Barb. Yep, I'm seeing the whole screen here. I'm going to
great,
go
thank
away.
you. All
I'll
right,
go back.
that's great, thank you. So, the idea behind 19 suffragists and 19 historic homes, of course, came from the fact that the 19th Amendment, which was the amendment that allowed women to vote, was passed 100 and now 101 years ago, in 1920. And that amendment said the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. It had to say that because the 15th Amendment granted all men the right to vote, but women were, of course, not allowed to vote in every state until 1920. Now, there is a great deal of there have been when this right was granted, um, Native American women were not allowed to vote. Many Asian people were not allowed to vote because they were restricted from citizenship. African Americans continued to struggle for voting rights, for a very long time, sometimes until today. Many people struggle for rights to vote. The reason to celebrate this is that this is the largest enfranchisement of people in the United States in its history. Overnight, on August 19th, 1920, overnight 26 million people were granted the right to vote. That was half of the adult population. So keep that in mind when we think about how many people were involved in it. And then I just thought I'd define historic home for a moment. It usually when we talk about a historic home, we mean it has a significant age. Most of these homes are going to be over 100 years old. They're in good condition. Well, some of them are gone, but I'll tell you which ones are gone, and have some historic importance. I think that they have historic importance because the women who did the work to pass this amendment lived in them. So that is the criterion I used to judge whether they were historic homes. There were three periods in Champaign County that were important. That's kind of the breakdown that I use. They're not, you know, hard and fast, but in 1870, Susan B. Anthony came to Champaign, spoke at the Walker Opera House, and spoke about women voting, but also women working and being able to keep the fruit of their labors. And that is really the beginning of awareness of the suffrage movement in Champaign County. And it spread quickly. And if you don't believe me, this article on the far left is the Champaign County Gazette, May 12th, published an article about Nellie Pyatt who was from Monticello, giving a lecture in Little Farmer City um, about uh, about suffrage, and it was well received. Um, the second period is the 1912-1913 era, and that's because in 1913, Illinois, the state, passed partial suffrage. And I share with you a newspaper article where it says petitions for suffrage signed. This was signed in 1912, and all of the text of this article are names of women in Champaign and Urbana, and some in St. Joseph and Homer area, who signed this petition to send to the state legislators to tell them to pass the state suffrage bill. Now, the state suffrage law um, granted women partial suffrage. They were allowed to vote for president, but they weren't allowed to vote in the primaries. And that's because the way the law was written, um, you couldn't vote for anything that was mentioned in the state constitution. Um, but then, of course, in 1920, even women in Illinois got complete suffrage. August 18th of 1920, the amendment was passed. There was a lot of activity around the 1912 era, less activity actually in Illinois around the 1920 era, probably because women already had the vote. But that was the period when the women who had been working so long and so hard for women's suffrage actually started to form new groups. And one of those new groups was the League of Women Voters. The University of Illinois has probably the first collegiate League of Women Voters was formed there. So that's an important period in the history, in the local history of women's suffrage. Let's move on to people, to our first woman, and she is Mary Melissa Harris. She was born in 1846 and died in 1923. And in 1888, she attended the National Council of Women uh, with her friend Elgin Ray. They heard lectures by Susan B. Anthony, Frances Willard, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Frances Willard was the president of the uh, national Women's Christian Temperance Union. But she was also quite in favor of suffrage. And when Mary Melissa Harris returned home, she and Elgin Ray formed a group called the Women's Social and Political Science Club. It had 35 women in it. They studied the Constitution. They studied Illinois government. They studied dowers, which was an important woman's issue, and wills. they studied crimes against women and crimes against children. They studied how women were allowed to hold money and even how they were allowed to do banking. And they were staunch supporters of the Burnham Hospital when that came about. Mary Melissa Harris lived in with her husband H. Harris at the corner of Elm and Church Streets. So that's 203 North Elm. That's right across from West Side Park. They had a huge, sprawling house. It is probably one would call this Second Empire style, probably, um, but it's quite eclectic. It has the kind of double hipped roof, um, which is called a mansard roof, and within that it has dormer windows, and it has that wonderful widow's walk and a central tower. Um, that um, newspaper article I showed you with all the names for the petition, she was the very first person to sign that as well. So she's still around in 1912 to push for the Illinois suffrage bill. Her friend Elgin Ray lived in this house. Um, she was born in 1853 and died in 1921. She also went to the National Council of Women, and her husband was in partnership with O.B. Dobbins. Um, Later in her life, she moved to northern Indiana and gave lectures in the Chicago area on the League of Nations. She lived in this beautiful Italianate mansion, which is 711 West University Avenue, and it's usually called the Stipes Collegier House. It's because the Stipes family lived there, and the Collegiers live there now. Um, it was owned by several people, and but for a brief time, about 10 years between 1895 and 1905, Ms. Ray lived there with her husband. The Italianate style has these bracketed eaves and usually has a cupola like that. You may be familiar with the Solon House over on Randolph Street. It's the same style. Um, so Elgin Ray and Mary Melissa Harris formed the Social and Political Science Club with the 35 women, and they studied all those things. And one of the ladies in their group was Julia Burnham. Julia Burnham was born in 1839 and died in 1894. She um, was forced to be reckoned with. She studied and studied all of women's issues and decided that what this town needed most probably was a hospital, and so she was actually responsible with her husband for forming the Burnham Hospital, which was I'll talk about it in a few minutes after I talk about her house, um, which was the first city hospital in Champaign. And she had when she, after the hospital was begun, she and her husband traveled to New York, and she was so impressed with Eastern libraries that she determined that she wanted also to build a library. But and all of this was in the interest of the welfare of women and children. Um, when she died before the library was built, but her husband built it in her name, and it became the first free Champaign public library. Um, so this is Julia's home. As you may be aware, Julia's home was sadly demolished about a year and a half ago, to make way for the expansion of Central High School. Um, the architectural significance of the home is that it was designed by a major architectural firm, Burnham and Root, in from Chicago, and were known for many things in Chicago, most particularly the design of the 1893 Columbian Exposition buildings. Julia was quite active in the community. I failed to mention that she was actually elected to the school board before she was before she was able to vote for herself. And she was also on the state charity board, which oversaw prisons, poorhouses, and homes for the mentally ill. Um, her home was a beautiful kind of Queen Anne extravaganza. With it has several different roofs and surfaces, like your typical Queen Anne. A forward-facing gable, fish scaling, patterned shingles, a great deal of asymmetry in the facade. This is what it looked like when it was built. Later, it was added on to twice by local architects, and this is how it appeared just before it was demolished. Um, and I also brought, for your delight, there's a picture of dear old Julia. Some interior shots as well, because these were taken just before its demolition. And there, I just love that wainscoting. The wainscoting is so beautiful. One of the beautiful fireplaces. Some of the exterior details. It's just lovely. This is the hospital. The hospital itself was a kind of a toned down Romanesque edifice. The Romanesque was a 11th and 12th century period in Europe that was marked by broad, round arches, and then had extra brickwork to emphasize the framing of the arches. And you can see that here is brought back in a kind of a revival. This is common in the late 19th century. Probably one of the best known buildings that you might know that has this is Altgeld Hall. Um, and the Burnham Hospital was built um, in 1893, I believe. And then the building, the hospital is now demolished, but the building for the original library still exists. And it's referred to as called the Burnham Athenaeum, Athenaeum being a fancy 19th century word for a library and a place of learning, after Athens being the seat of Greek democracy. Um, the Athenaeum is at 306 West Church Street. It was built through a donation from Albert. Um, it's a two-story building in cream colored brick with terracotta ornamentation. The front entrance has 4 Ionic columns, and it has this wonderful feeling of being a temple of learning. It's this this there are some wonderful details. I'm not sure you can see them. Here they are. There's the top of the Ionic column, and a wonderful frieze that terracotta frieze that talks about the founding of the building. So it's not just Julia's home that was beautiful, but also the building she was responsible for making happen. Um, so then The library movement was a huge movement in the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century because women saw uh, the education of women as part of the necessity um, for getting them the vote. So Julia founded a library, and so did her friend and acquaintance, Mary Busey. Mary Busey was quite a lady in her own right. She was the wife of Samuel Busey, the banker, but she was also uh, also an elected official. She was elected to the Board of Trustees from the University of Illinois and served from 1904 to 1930. She's the second longest running trustee ever. Um, she established on-campus housing for women, and Busey Hall is named for her. She was a member um, of practically every women's organization you can think of. In 1909, her husband drowned, and she ran the Busey business for the next 20 years by herself. She was appointed in 1915 and 1916 to the Illinois Equal Suffrage Association, and that later led to her membership in the League of Women Voters. Um, she's known as a philanthropist, and she gave money to found the Urbana Free Library. Her son died in World War I, just 10 days before the end of the war, sadly. And she pushed very hard for women to get the vote, which was a common thing because they had done so much for the war effort and sacrificed their own sons and couldn't vote themselves. And that was I think that was a big argument in the national scene as well. This is Mary's house. It no longer exists. It was at 502 West Main Street, Urbana, which is where the Landmark Apartments are. They're not called Landmark Apartments anymore, but that's why they were called the Landmark Apartments, because they knocked down a landmark to put them up. Has those crazy brackets, but it also has what appears to be a mansard roof. It is probably Second Empire as well. Has a glorious wraparound porch with a with an interesting uh, conservatory on the corner. Must have been a thing to see. Here is Mary as the on the board of trustees. She's the one with the big white feather in her hair. um, Interesting story about the Urbana Free Library. This, which is on the right here. The Carnegie Foundation was creating free libraries all over the country, and Urbana applied for one and was turned down, and Mary then came through with a $35,000 donation, which in 1915 was immense. Um, so that she could found this library in her husband's name. It itself is a landmark, a beautiful. Again, the temple to learning that libraries were considered to be. And I put this centennial celebration of the Samuel Busey Library in there so that you could see that it was indeed called the Samuel Busey Library when it was open. Mary Busey had neighbors, and the neighbors were also involved in the women's suffrage movement. Lydia Marriott lived next door to Mary, and at 506 West Main Street. I guess she lived two doors down from Mary. She was a founding member of the Busy 15. The Busy 15 was a women's group that was concerned mostly with charity, but also with women's rights. Um, and th- they were concerned about the poor and needy children of West Urbana, and put together food drives for the indigent, and clothing drives, made sure the kids got to school, did tutoring. Um, and Lydia was also part of the Chautauqua movement. In the early 20th century in Urbana, the Chautauqua was a big several day affair where there were many speakers from all over the country. And Lydia and her neighbor, um, Alma Yearsley, who happened to be her sister, um, would be on the committee to decide who would come to speak. And there was always a woman's rights aspect to that. Um, in 1891, Mary Busey's husband, Samuel, decided to sell his pasture land, and Frank and Lydia Mary had bought one of the lots. They paid $1,000 per lot because it was really um, prestigious to live next door to the Buseys. And then they basically spent $5,000 building their homes. Um, and both her home and her sister's home are these beautiful Queen Anne's, 2.5 stories. This one has a great tower on it. Um, Lots of crazy different surfaces, lots of asymmetry, um, and a beautiful bracketed columns on the porch. Um, here's a picture of the Busy 15, um, and an article about them from their 25th anniversary. Um, and then Alma Yearsley's house is at 508 West Main Street, and is very much like her sister's house. It is missing a tower, but there was a tower on this house, but it came down in the 1950s because it had a water um, tank in it, and the water tank leaked. And well, you know how that is on older homes. Um, Alma's daughter Mary was really quite instrumental in the founding of the League of Women Voters in the early 1920s after suffrage was passed. So you could count her as yet another suffragist. This house is also a Queen Anne. Has a lovely sunburst on the pediment of the porch. Beautifully turned posts, and the scroll work and on the porch as well. You can't really see the scroll work on the colored picture because they're painted blue now, but very just another beautiful home on Main Street in Urbana, once occupied by a suffragist. Um, these are probably my two favorite suffrage ladies in all of Champaign-Urbana history. On the left is Eliza Vincent, who was born in 1844 and died in 1921. And on the right is Lily Bell Sale. Eliza Vincent's husband was a tenant farmer in Rantoul, and she was a school teacher in Rantoul. Um, she um, she and Lily Bell Sale was a school teacher, and for 30 years a school attendance officer in Urbana. They're dressed up for the 1913 suffrage parade. The suffrage parade in Washington, D.C. on March 3rd, 1913 was that happened the day before Woodrow Wilson's inauguration and disrupted everything. Women from every state came. They came in costumes representing their state. This was the Illinois state costume. Um, they marched. There were probably close to 8,000 women. It's widely believed this was the very first um, march on Washington. And you can see that they did it with all the pageantry they could. The parade was led by Inez Milholland, who was dressed up like a Greek warrior princess. So it was an amazing affair, and they came back to tell tales of their adventure. Um, Eliza Vincent, we don't know where she lived in Rantoul. Haven't tracked that down yet. But she did live for a while at 606 West Main Street, which is really interesting because uh, this home was once owned by and lived in by Lily Bell Sale. So I think what happened was after Eliza's husband and daughter died, Eliza moved into town and lived in a house owned by the woman that she went to the parade with. Um, Mrs. Vincent was very proud of the fact that she went to Washington, D.C. and was in this parade. And she came back and told stories frequently about her adventure there. And this it says St. Joseph women hear Mrs. Vincent, and this article talks about her going to Washington, D.C. to the Women's Christian Temperance Union, where she encourages them to keep up with suffrage. And she also shows them her outfit that she wore on that at the parade. Um, we do know that Eliza Vincent was the first woman to be a clerk elected in a village election in Rantoul, and that she did a good deal of work with managing properties in Rantoul. Um, Lily Bell Sale was um, quite the um, character in her own right, and she was a truant officer, as I said earlier. Her husband was a prominent dentist, and her children were fairly successful actors. Chick Sale on the left of the two um, people on the right of the screen. Chick was a vaudevillian and a character actor, and he appeared in 37 Hollywood films. Virginia was a character actress and appeared in over 160 Hollywood films. Um, Lily Bell went to Washington, D.C. as well. And when she came back, she joined with Ms. Vincent to talk about their adventures in Washington, D.C. A third woman who is not pictured in any of those, Mrs. Dobbins, you might notice in the middle of the true story of the suffrage parade, Mrs. Dobbins of Champaign will speak of the inefficient police regulations during the parade. She was the third person who went and and experienced not the best treatment by the police in that parade. In 1914, one of the Shock was brought a national speaker to Washington D.C. To Urbana, and it was a woman who was against the alcohol lobby. And as we know, all of these women, many of these women were in the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Lily Bell Sale lived towards the end of her life, from 1926 on, in number 7 in Buena Vista Court. Buena Vista Court is a small uh, enclosed court of Spanish colonial revival homes in on Elm Street in Urbana. There are 8 little bungalows nestled in 2 rows. with a courtyard in between them. And no two of the bungalows are alike. Each one of them is a different color, and has a distinctive different um, profile for the top of the house, for the parapet of the house. The one that Lily Bell lived in is blue, and it looks like the parapet has actually been filled in some spaces. This is the one on the right. She lived in number 7. Um, it's tough to get pictures of them because they are so close together, but um, this is on the left is a little what's left of a little stucco frieze that was on her home, and this is the porch on the right, and this is another one of the bungalows, so that you can see what they generally look like, because I wasn't able to take a good enough picture of the of her home as a unit. This is the original drawings of Buena Vista Court. Edith Dobbins was the woman who reported about the poor treatment by the police in the suffrage parade. Um, Apparently, there were bystanders who threw all kinds of things at the women in the suffrage parade in 1913, and the police pretty much did nothing to protect them. Um, in the police's defense, probably they hadn't really ever seen anything like this before. um, and I think they were a bit puzzled by it, but it seemed um, intentional in some ways, and Ms. Dobbins was not happy about it. Um, on the this is her in a quite a young picture of her. She was the wife of the mayor of Champaign for a short while, O.B. Dobbins. And when he was giving a speech in 1910, he said that his wife was responsible for his remarks about suffrage. He said he argued that he argued against the theory that real women do not want to vote, and that it's only managed to do so. He said that it was the saloon interests that were keeping women from voting, and he would always work against toward women on the ballot. He said, women and mothers know how to cast the ballot, but at times their husbands and sons slip away from them and cast a wrong vote. If wives and mothers are allowed to vote, they have a more direct interest in the ballot of their husbands and sons. He said, but he said those were her ideas. Edith lived in a couple of smaller homes, one on 805 West Illinois Street in Urbana. Looks like a little gabled L there. And one at 708 West Church Street, a small colonial home in Champaign. She spent much of her life at 814 West Church Street, which no longer exists, which was a big Dutch colonial that came down when the pavilion was built. Next, I don't have a picture of Lucinda Pearl Boggs, but she is certainly worth mentioning. Lucinda Pearl Boggs was a born in the 1870s and died in the 1930s. She was uh, the graduated from the University of Illinois in 1894. She studied in Europe. She studied in Cornell. She taught at Rice and at Western College in Oxford, Ohio, which eventually became part of Miami University. She spent a good bit of her life in China. um, and uh, is widely accepted as the first person to write anything about Chinese women. This is her book, um, in the Western world. Um, she and her brother, who was the mayor of Urbana at the same time as O.B. Dobbins, Edith Dobbins' husband, was mayor of Champaign. Um, she and her brother sponsored Chinese students to come to the United States and study at the University of Illinois. And there's a wonderful um, website at the U of I on early Chinese students. They talk about Lucinda Pearl Boggs. Lucinda Boggs was a huge proponent of women voting and went all around the county teaching women how to vote after they received the vote in Illinois in 1913. Um, Here's an article about Mayor Boggs says that women would close the bootleg joints. Again, the issue with alcohol was huge, and the mayor thought that the suffragists would make a difference in uh, in the whole issue of alcohol. So he was in favor of it for that very reason. Of course, he and his sister were both quite involved in the temperance movement. This is her home at the end of her life on 806 West 811 West 806 West Indiana. She lived at 806 West Illinois, which is really quite interesting because she lived right down the street from uh, the Dobbins family. So those two mayors lived quite close to each other at one point. Um, Somebody who is kind of outside of the circle of the people we've been talking about is Nora Dunlap. Nora Dunlap lived at in Savoy at 801 North Dunlap Road. She married Henry Dunlap, who was a state senator, and she and Henry had several children who died in uh, at a very young age. And she said later in life that that inspired her to try to figure out what she had done wrong, which this breaks my heart. But um, it inspired her to uh, take up women's causes, the things that would hurt children and hurt women were things that she wanted to champion fixing. And so she became very active in the suffrage movement and also in the home economics movement, making a science of um, what women did was important to her to justify that they did work and that it required skill. Um, she spoke to the DAR on the topic of women citizens, and it says she showed in her address that she lost none of her zeal for women's suffrage. She said that we are living in a man-made world, that our laws have originated from old English laws which gave women an inferior place, giving political rights to men. So she didn't mince words. And she put so much effort into teaching women and rewarding women for education that eventually there was a home economics school started in Springfield on the state fairgrounds named for her, the Dunlap School, um, so that women could learn how to how to care for their families in a proper way. She lived what is now called the Senator's Inn. Um, it was the Dunlap home. It was built in 1915, kind of a uh, toned down Georgian house. It has the portico and the side lights and around the front door and the dormer windows of a Georgian built of brick, 2 stories, symmetrical. Has an interesting kind of side sleeping porch. Um, it was believed in the early 20th century that the sleeping porch would cure tuberculosis or keep it away. And so you would find in this area lots of sleeping porches on homes. A couple of uh, closer shots, just because we can have them, of the front door. There's the side lights in the front door, and a beautiful paneled, all paneled, now used as a bedroom. Probably. All right. Also, kind of outside of the society ladies was L. Bell Goodman. L. Bell Goodman was a farm woman whose husband made quite a bit of money and they moved into town in the early 20th century, and she got involved in a lot of the same activities as the other women did, but her passion was teaching women how to vote. And she wrote a book, and which was first published in 1913, called the Illinois Voters Handbook. Um, it continued to be published until after her death in 1931. And it doesn't occur to you, but when women got the vote, they didn't know how, and they were afraid to because they didn't know how. So she broke it down into what is a primary, what's a general election, what's a state office, what is a county office. And as we know, there are lots and lots and lots of offices in Illinois. There are more forms of government than any other state, according to some people. Um, and then what's a national office, and where does the money go? And then how to vote. What does a ballot look like? And you can see that from the table of contents here. This is her home, and this home is probably the home that inspired me to do this talk, because she lived at 816 West Hill, and what is kind of an elaborate uh, gabled L house, I think. Um, she and I live probably 10 blocks from this house. So I thought, if women could, like L. Bell Goodman, could live in my neighborhood 100 years ago, 120 years ago, then they lived everywhere, and they did. I mean, when you start to look at around you, you find that remarkable people have lived in your neighborhood too. Um, Another remarkable suffragist was Kate Baker Ducey. She lived at 503 West Elm in Urbana. She was lucky in a way, because she was born into quite a social reforming family. Her family were progressive long before she was born. They were involved in the Underground Railroad during the Civil War. She was educated in St. Louis in the normal school to be an art teacher, and then she went to Cincinnati to learn how to do woodworking. Learned with the German cabinet makers in Cincinnati how to do woodworking, and this cabinet is on the right. It was actually made by her and is in the Illinois State Museum. Um, she for a while she taught African American and Native American people in Virginia um, how to do art in the after hours. Uh, they worked at the Hampton Institute in Virginia, and then she would teach them in the evening. And but then she took a job at the Champaign Daily Gazette, and eventually through that met George Busey and married him, and they built this house, which no longer exists. It was at 503 West Elm. She was a founding member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, and the Fortnightly Club, and both of them met to discuss topics of world history and promote women's suffrage throughout the state. Um, she was also big in the library movement, and there are many letters and speeches on women's suffrage that Kate wrote in the Illinois History and Lincoln Collection at the University of Illinois. She was also instrumental in getting the Lincoln plaques that are at every courthouse and every county line um, place put in place. Um, Next up, Alice Freeman. Alice Freeman was the daughter of Simeon Busey, who was one of the two Busey bank brothers. Um, she was part of a delegation in 1912 that went to the state to lobby the legislators to listen to their interest in passing a suffrage bill. It took another year for that to happen. She was also on the committee that brought uh, LSAS Stewart, Bertha Stewart, and Catherine McCullough, three very important Chicago um, suffragists to town to make a big address at the courthouse in 1910. And Alice Freeman lived in this beautiful house, was with 504 West Elm Street in Urbana, which was designed um, by Joseph Royer. It's an amazing uh, classical revival extravaganza with with beautiful fan light windows and these huge columns and a wonderful oculus at the top of a pediment that's decorated. It's just it's an enormously beautiful building, and we're lucky that it still exists. But speaking of Royer, Adelaide Royer was also a suffragist. Adelaide Royer was married to Joseph Royer, the uh, architect who designed and built so many buildings in Champaign and Urbana. And of course, he also designed Adelaide's home, which is a wonderful kind of mission style arts and crafts affair, and also the mother-in-law home that uh, was also on their property. And uh, Adelaide um, wrote a little book about this house called the Fairy House. It's a lovely little kind of English country cottage affair. Um, Adelaide was maybe not quite as involved in women's issues as much as some of these other ladies, but she was involved in two ways. One, she was in the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and her husband um, negotiated with the WCTU to put a a pro-suffrage um, statue up in front of his Flatiron building in Urbana. And then she also was very much interested in women being able to pursue their artistic interests. Um, and a lady who was not in all of the clubs, but who did just as much for women's suffrage as some of them, was Louise McWilliams. Louise McWilliams was a milliner, and it seems almost impossible to believe now how important millinery was, but every woman wore a hat, and many owned more than one hat. And the hats were as important probably to them as our phones are to us. Um, she ran for almost 60 years of business, first in Urbana and then in Champaign, um, uh, selling and fitting women for hats. And she was a businesswoman and very much involved in business affairs in Champaign and Urbana. Um, she was she commissioned a house from Joseph Royer, a rather less extravagant classical revival, um, a little bit less extravagant than the Freeman House, but on the same scale. It was actually the year before 1901 and 1902. Those homes were, and she was active in the Republican Party. The Republican Party was overwhelmingly pro-suffrage, and she backed Senator McKinley. McKinley was the senator, the only senator ever to have been, uh, and we're talking U.S. senator, to have been elected from Champaign, and he was pro-suffrage and was the senator from here who voted for uh, the suffrage amendment. Um, her backing of Senator McKinley was very important to her because for a very important women's rights issue, and that was that she wanted, and he did eventually make this happen. She wanted the women's club, the women's town club, to be formed from the annex of the Beardsley Hotel. So on the right, in this picture on the right, is the Beardsley Hotel, and then an extra building to house more guests was built to the left, um, on Hill Street, and at 112 West Hill Street. That building still exists, and it now houses the Buzard Organ Works. But it was once the Women's Town Club, which was it was bought by um, uh, with the help of Senator McKinley, so that it could be a safe place for women to live who worked in downtown Champaign. And you can see how a woman in business for herself for many, many years might think that was a very important thing to have. Um, it's a it's a lovely old uh, mercantile building with those with big broad arches. Um, I think we have two more ladies, maybe. Um, second to the last lady is Mary Cunningham. Mary Cunningham was the wife of J.O. Cunningham. J.O. Cunningham was is the premier historian of the early part of Champaign's um, county's history. And he was a judge. He was a judge who knew Abraham Lincoln, but who lived well into the 20th century and was able to tell stories about him. Um, and Mary and her husband, at the end of their lives, gave their magnificent home, which you'll see in the next slide, um, to become Cunningham Children's Home. It was an orphanage for quite some time, and now it, of course, helps um, children in need. Um, but Mary's husband, being a judge, often had to judge against women's suffrage issues. But it seems that he and Mary were closet suffragists, because towards the end of his life, he he very gleefully spoke uh, at the courthouse when there was a big event at the courthouse welcoming national figures to speak. And it says he was reported to always have been strong for the oppressed and a believer that the woman has the same right to vote as the man. Um, and at the end of his speech, he talked about how the Supreme Court decision went down because it condemned one half of the people to be robbed of their rights. Now, we don't really know, in Mary's own words, whether she was a suffragist. She was on several of the same committees as many of these other ladies were, but I found it very interesting that that in her obituary there was a special section where it said cast first vote for president. She died in 1921, just after the suffrage amendment was passed. But it said Mrs. Cunningham cast her first vote for a president of the United States at the November election in 1920. In this ballot, she adhered to the family traditions which counted her father as a loyal Whig and later as a Republican. So she was proud enough of it that her family thought it was important um, to incorporate it into her obituary. This is the home that they donated to Cunningham Children's Home. I believe most of the latter part of this was added to be part of the orphanage, the back part of it, but the front part of it was their home. It's kind of a crazy, eclectic kind of second empire, because it's got a mansard roof, got a crazy tower. It must have been a thing to see. Um, and uh, one last um, one last person I wanted to include, and you're going to say it says 18 and you said 19, but I'll explain in a minute. That last person is Amelia Stern. Amelia Stern is widely believed to be the first Jewish female student to graduate from the University of Illinois. She was a founding member of the university's first sorority. And as an alumnus, she actually organized the U of I Mothers Association and founded uh, Mother's Day and at the U of I. And she was a strong proponent of women's suffrage. And actually, on that same day that Judge Cunningham talked about how he's always been behind women, and they had national speakers come. It says Mrs. Albert Stern spoke for suffrage on the theory that women have a better insight into sanitary conditions and that women are the buying force of the nation. She argued that women have used their buying power indiscriminately through ignorance, but if they had the ballot, housekeeping would be raised to the standard of a profession. This is her home. Her home is kind of a big, robust foursquare. So, and I live in a foursquare. Oh, I think that this is an appropriate way to end at 1009 University. There's a home that looks like so many other homes that held a lady who worked hard for her peers to get the vote. Um, Amelia Stern. Now, what about 19? Well, I put a lot of things on this slide, and I wanted to make a couple of points to finish up. Um, there are hundreds more women that we know of that are published in newspapers that we can find accounts of who helped push representatives and congressmen to pass the legislation to end um, to allow women to vote. But there are lots of other things that went into it, things that can't be documented because so many people didn't have voices. Native American women, for example, apparently served as a model for the early suffragists because they had more seemingly seemed to have more rights than European Americans. And I just brought a photo of a painting of a Native American woman that we know passed through here, a Potawatomi. There were some Potawatomi who lived in this county, and we should be grateful that we are here living where they once lived. Um, African American ladies worked so hard. In fact, this is the woman in the bottom center here is Ida B. Wells. And Ida B. Wells marched alongside her Illinois counterparts. So theoretically, next to Lily Bell Sale and Edith Dobbins and um, Eliza Vincent to for suffrage. And actually, the parade organizers tried to exclude Black women from the mainstream of the parade, and Ida B. Wells would have none of it and joined anyway. But the fact of the matter is, we don't know any of the African American women's names locally because it wasn't published in the newspaper. And above Ida B. Wells is the St. Luke Christian Methodist Episcopal Church in Champaign, and I think that is where we would find more information about about Black women who sought and worked hard for the right to vote. Um, the next blue house there is a house a block away from me, and I'm investigating right now a woman who lived there who probably was involved in the suffrage movement. And to the bottom right, there's a house in St. Joe. And we know in St. Joe and in Homer and in Sydney, there were women who worked for the movement, but it's harder to again to find information about people who lived outside of the mainstream of the news cycle. And so there's always work to be done, but there's also always um, someone nearby who worked for this very important right. And you probably live near someone too, or you drive past someone's house in an older neighborhood and don't know it, which is why we need to remember um, how we need to honor the work that people do today for other people's rights and for their welfare, and we need to honor those people who did that in the past. And with that, I'll take questions, I guess. I'm going to stop sharing, Pat.
All right.
That okay?
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh,
Okay.
like Shauna says, bravo. Yeah, yeah. No, I learned so much, and I gotta come back to this program. Nancy just asked in the comments. She was on a different meeting until just now. Is there a recording she could check out? And I'm going to check out a recording too, so I can get down these addresses and go check out some of these homes. Earlier in the presentation, Katie had asked, "Is there a list of addresses or a map of them?" Barb, did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, well, it is my intention to I didn't get it quite done, but it is my intention to make a brochure out of this and also to do a Clio out of this. So if you want to watch on Facebook for that, we'll publish when that's available and where to get it. It shouldn't take too much longer to get it done, but I just didn't get it done for tonight.
Yeah.
So yeah, we
Stay
can
tuned.
we can get a
Stay tuned for that. Yeah.
and it'll be a map with dots on it, and it'll have a brief reminder of what those places meant.
Yeah.
And I'll mark out the places where the things have been demolished too, because I think it's important to look around the neighborhood and see, where that place would have been.
Yeah, we had a couple folks who said they were a little sad to see the Burnham house demolished a little early on in the presentation. Katie, I think in reference to the Buena Vista Court, a Spanish courtyard. She says she loves that little courtyard. Always wondered about the history. Um, Sharon, that's cool. Girl power and knowledge is power. I think she was talking about the handbook that was created, the guidebook to go.
Oh yeah, there were more than one of those, but when I found out that that one was written by a lady who lived on um 2 blocks down and 5 blocks west of me, it was just too much. And that she lives there most of her life, right? It wasn't just you know, passing through.
Yeah,
And it was used all throughout Illinois. It's just amazing to me. And the thought of not knowing how to vote, like not I guess I remember going to the polls with my mom, and my mom showed me what happened. What do you do? But women didn't have that. And also it was scary for them because kind of like it is still scary for some people who are asked for uh credentials when they go to vote. Women were asked, they had to show that they were married. If they were married, they had to show what their whole name was. And it wasn't like now where you go get an identification card or a driver's license. They didn't really have any way to prove that. Often they couldn't have a bank account. They didn't have their birth certificates. They had to find some way to prove who they were, which was for many people, especially women who had not been socialized this way, a really a big step to overcome. So yeah, it was great to have a book to tell you what to do.
if folks have questions, feel free to write those in the comments section. Got a few coming in here. I thought this was cool. Marina, who we work with, Marina said she lived, I believe, referring to 504 West Elm, the Royer House in Urbana. She lived there in college in one of the apartments. I didn't under.
Oh, um, Mary Margaret asked how many of these homes have been. That's really cool, Marina. I didn't know that. We'll have to talk about that.
Yeah,
Um,
related to apartments. Yeah, Mary Margaret asked about how many of these homes have been broken up into apartments. Yeah.
so some of them have, but some of them are still single family homes. I think I'm pretty sure the Royer House is still a single family home. The Marriott and the Yearsley home are still single family homes. The I think some of the Buena Vista Court are rentals, but some are owned. And The Freeman House is definitely a bajillion apartments because when I was taking a photograph, noticed that there were like a dozen mailboxes. So
Some have even been, as you mentioned before, demolished and apartments built on top of where they used
yeah,
to be. Like you referenced the Busey home. I thought it was, interesting that they demolished a landmark and then now the apartments are called landmark apartments. But
just, in what world does that make any sense?
yeah, yeah,
I'm a historic preservationist, so that
yeah,
I'm gonna think that,
yeah,
but really, it doesn't make any sense. But Mary Margaret, while it might seem like a shame to break things into apartments. At the same time, it maintains the building, and often it can be a respectful way to reuse a house that can't be used as a single family home anymore. So, also the McWilliams house is now owned by the Presbyterian Church, and is they use it for a secondhand store. But at least they're keeping it right, and
yeah,
heat is on, and the lights are on, and the plumbing works, and it's important to adaptively reuse buildings.
yeah. I mean, at least they're being repurposed and reused instead of being
Right,
just completely wiped away, which is good. So
right.
better than being demolished, I guess.
Yeah.
Quite a few people saying, thank you, great presentation. Laura asks, good question here. If you're a budding, historian, where would you go to find all this stuff? How'd you find all this stuff, Barb?
Well, Laura, it's called research. Um, I did a lot of work for the exhibit that we did, and I would encourage you to come see the exhibit if you can. Um, the University of Illinois has a wonderful resource called the Illinois Digital Newspapers, and it's digitized lots of newspapers from Champaign and Urbana from that era. Not everything, but a lot. And that was very, very helpful. Um, the Illinois Digital Archives is a place where you can find a lot of photographs. The University of Illinois has the Illinois History and Lincoln collections, also very useful. The Champaign County Archives is a great place for this kind of um, uh, information. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic and the fact that not all of their stuff is digitized, I couldn't do all the research I wanted to do. But and that's why there are, like, I know that a picture of some of these ladies exists. I just can't get at it right at the moment. So, I wanted to make sure that we saw the women's faces too. So, and that was really important to me. So, but Laura, if you want to talk about it or email me, email is on the Museum of the Grand Prairie's webpage. And, but I'd be happy to talk to you on the phone about it too. You can find our phone number there too.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good local resources for all this stuff. Yeah, those digitized newspapers are really cool. They're keyword searchable, in some cases, and
Yeah.
can be very, very handy. And a lot of really good institutions locally who are really, really glad to help anybody who's interested in learning more about their local history. So check them out for sure.
That's true. That's true. The Champaign
Um,
County History Museum has some good material as well.
yeah, yeah,
They're also closed right at the moment, but we'll come out of this pandemic someday, and
yeah.
that'll be
Like
my next talk.
like you mentioned, you mentioned midway through the talk, each one of these homes just shows that there's so much history right in people's neighborhoods, right in their backyards, and lots of really good places to learn about local history right in your backyard as well.
Yeah, I talked to a student yesterday who was interested in doing something for the DI, and to me, these women are the heroes that lived among us. That just can't not think of them that way. You think about what a huge impact it made on changing the course of this country's history. And there are ladies who did it all over the country. So
Yeah,
I'm humbled by
well said, Barb.
that.
We got maybe one last question here.
Okay.
If you can answer it, Barb. You know why Carnegie didn't give money for a library in Urbana, PA, is asking.
I don't know why. I haven't done the research into that, but you know, I think Carnegie is actually a fascinating guy all by himself. I mean, he came from nothing. He made a bajillion dollars, and then he was seized by guilt for having bajillion dollars and gave it all away and created a library system all over the country. I mean, what a magnificent thing to do. We should all think about sharing our wealth like that. So he didn't, but then he made Mary Busey do it, so that's okay. Because I think one of the great resources in our towns in Champaign and Urbana are the libraries. I mean, they're
Oh yeah,
magnificent libraries, so we
yeah,
should be.
two wonderful libraries for sure. Yeah,
Yep.
Champaign Public and Urbana Free Libraries are really great. Um, but yeah, a lot of people enjoying the presentation tonight. I enjoyed it. Edna enjoyed it. Wonderful. Champaign County is an amazing place. Marina, great info. Barb, love knowing all the history of these local buildings and women. Mary Margaret, good points. Thanks. Thanks everybody for tuning in tonight. Thanks to Barb for putting together this presentation. Doing such a good job, and I learned so much. And I'm like I said, I'm excited to go drive and do a little walking and checking out some of these places, and maybe trying to sneak in some photos. Some of these houses if people don't catch me. But,
It is a little troubling when you take a picture of somebody's house and they say, "What are you doing?"
yeah, yeah. Thanks for
Well, come to my talk.
yeah, that's right.
Hey,
Yeah,
so everyone, feel free to keep checking the museum's Facebook page. We'll have something about the map soon. Okay.
right. Yeah. Well, thanks, Barb. Thanks
You're
everybody for
welcome. Thank
tuning
you.
in.
Thank
Enjoy the
you,
rest of your night,
everybody,
everybody.
for coming and paying attention. I really appreciate it. Bye.
Thank you for tuning into CUI's TV. We hope you enjoyed the show. This video can be accessed anytime on youtube.com. In the YouTube search bar, type in UPTV6 and look for their microphone logo. We hope you will join us again next week for more local, engaging content designed specifically for Champaign